Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. Today I'm talking about the book The Bird's Nest by Shirley Jackson. And this is my second time recording this review because the first time I did it, something is wrong with my sound on my iPhone. It sounds terrible, so I had to plug in an external microphone and try to do it that way, which is a lot more work for me and it's annoying. But hopefully it will sound better for you, and that's really all I care about, gentle viewer. I'm a big Shirley Jackson fan. I like everything I've read by her. She's famous, of course, for The Haunting of Hill House, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, and most importantly, the short story The Lottery. She's written many other short stories and several other novels. I read her novel Hangs a Man, I think the beginning of this year, and I loved it. That was her second novel. I reviewed it on the channel. Excellent, highly recommend. And now I read her third novel, The Bird's Nest, and I also picked up a copy of her fourth novel called The Sundial, which I haven't read yet, and I will get to that at some point, but not immediately because I want to spread these things out. This was written in 1954. It's her third novel, as I said, and it's about a young woman named Elizabeth who has multiple personalities. Now, that's not a spoiler because it's on the jacket of the book. It's in the introduction of the book. It's the premise of the book. So it's not used as a lot of these type of plot devices are as like a twist to like explain what's been going on the whole time. You find it out very early in the book. So I'm not spoiling it for anybody. And the novel is told from a series of perspectives. Some of her different personalities have their own chapters devoted to them, and a psychiatrist who is seeing her has chapters devoted to him, and the other character who has a chapter devoted to her is Elizabeth's Aunt Morgan, who she lives with after the death of her mother. And you kind of find out about her. She works in a museum. She's young. She's about to turn 25. And you learn gradually about her life and about her condition and like why she's, forgetting things and things aren't making sense. And she feels persecuted and has headaches and backaches and all these problems. And you gradually kind of learn more and more about her. I would say that for me, this is my least favorite of the books by Shirley Jackson that I've read. And I don't mean that as a criticism or a knock, really, because I like all the stuff I've read by her. So it's kind of a high bar to compare things to. But this one didn't quite work for me in a way a lot of her other novels worked. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One reason is that the multiple personality trope is fairly played out at this point. And that's not Shirley Jackson's fault. She was writing in the 50s. I think it was probably pretty novel and interesting back then. It's been done so many times now that it's harder to find it interesting in this kind of setting, especially when it's kind of laid out at the beginning and presented as something really novel, when it's not that novel anymore. We've seen The Three Faces of Eve and Sybil and a bunch of movies and TV shows where it's used as a twist, which I will not talk about because I don't want to spoil that for anyone who hasn't seen them. So that's a little bit, not as interesting now as it would have been 70 years ago. The other thing is I found the characters a little bit hard to sympathize with. I didn't particularly like Elizabeth or any of her personalities. I didn't really feel that sorry for her. I wasn't really that interested in what happened to her. I didn't really like her Aunt Morgan very much, and I didn't really like the doctor very much. Dr. Wright is his name. I found him kind of unpleasant and grumpy, and nobody was that likable to me, and I didn't really care that much what happened to them. So that's the reason that it didn't really work for me. And then the third reason I would say is it's sort of presented as almost like a case study, like psychiatrist notes, especially the chapters written by the doctor. It's really less about like suspense and mystery and more about just like laying out the facts of the case. It kind of reminds me of some of Agatha Christie's novels in that sense, where she just like sets up, here's all the evidence, go through it. And like to me, like the suspense and the not knowing is what's interesting. And there's a little bit of that in this, but we find out what her deal is so quickly that there's most of the suspense has been destroyed by the second chapter. There is a little bit of suspense in the like trying to figure out what happened to her when she was younger and why she has had this psychotic break and what's going on in her life. And that's interesting and that's good. And that's, I think, where the novel is at its best, because one of the things I really love about Shirley Jackson is she suggests more than she tells, particularly in the novel Hangs a Man, which I really loved. There's just like so much ambiguity and so much of just suggestion of things that you don't really know what's going on. And you have to kind of fill in the gaps yourselves. And I think that's really spooky and good because like she's primarily known as a horror writer. And I wouldn't really call this a horror book, but where it's at its kind of creepiest and eeriest is when you get a hint of something from Elizabeth's past and you don't really know what it means, but like your imagination starts to run wild with it. And then like you imagine all these terrible things, and it's probably worse than anything that she could have actually put in the book itself. So, I like that kind of stuff. I like that kind of ambiguity and that kind of letting the reader fill in the gaps. And there's some of that in here towards the end. And I think that's where the book is at the best. But overall, it's sort of just laying out, here are the facts of the case. And I didn't find that quite so interesting. So what else was I going to say about this book? The horror aspect, yeah, it's not as scary as her other books. It's not really meant to be as scary as her other books, but I like the themes. This is like a recurring theme in Shirley Jackson's work, is like young women and their insecurities and their kind of disturbed minds in some cases. And I think that the subjectivity of the human mind and, that disconnect between like reality and what's going on in the brain is fascinating. I love the unreliable narrator aspect of it, where you're not really quite sure what's real and what isn't. There's a little bit of that going on with the aunt, where you're not really quite sure if she's experiencing reality either, and maybe there's like some kind of madness that runs in the family. I like all that a lot. So she's really good at that kind of stuff. I just think this one feels a little bit more dated and of its time than the other ones, which have held up better over time. So I will be interested to read more of her books. And she has a first novel, which I don't have yet. I think that's the last of her novels to read after The Sundial. So I'll get to that eventually. But I'd be interested to know your thoughts on The Bird's Nest and on any of the Shirley Jackson books you've read. Which ones are your favorite? Which ones are your least favorite? And why? Please leave that in the comments down below. I'd love to talk about it. And if you enjoyed this review, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell for notifications. And before you say anything, everyone always comments, the candle is fine. It's not going to set the books on fire. I'm careful with it. Everyone always complains about it, but I think it's nice to have a candle in the background, and I know what I'm doing. So calm down. Okay. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. And have a very happy Thanksgiving. I'm going to be traveling to my family for tomorrow, or today, actually, when this is released. It will be today. And I'll have a good time. And I hope you have a good time as well. And I'll be back next week with another book review for your viewing pleasure. Until then, thanks again for watching. I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I will catch you later.